The story of the Labubu doll begins not in the brightly lit shelves of toy stores or the pristine walls of collectors' cabinets, but in the murky crossroads between folklore and modern consumer obsession. Labubu, for most people, is a quirky designer toy, born from the imagination of Ka-Sing Lung, a Hong Kong-based illustrator. With its sharp teeth, wide, unsettling grin, and strangely endearing rabbit-like ears, it doesn't fit the mold of a traditional, cute collectible. It was never meant to be Barbie perfect or Disney polished. Instead, Labubu's strange charm lies in its unsettling balance of adorable and grotesque. But what most don't know is that Labubu, long before it became a trending figure, carried with it whispers of something darker, stories that collectors in hushed tones describe as the curse of the doll. One of the earliest unsettling accounts surrounding Labubu comes from an underground collector-esque convention in Hong Kong in 2013. A small group of toy enthusiasts gathered to celebrate the first hand-painted Labubu prototypes. One collector, who managed to get one of the rarest pieces, claimed later that the doll's eyes seemed to change under certain lights, reflecting not glass, but something alive. He joked to others that the toy watched him back. Within weeks, he began to suffer from sleepless nights, hearing scratching sounds at his window, despite living on the 15th floor of a high-rise. His neighbors recalled him complaining of dreams where the Labubu crawled from its shelf, its sharp grin widening as it whispered in a language he could not understand. The man was later found in his apartment in a state of severe exhaustion, surrounded by dozens of sketches of the doll, drawings he did not remember making. As Labubu gained global recognition, more stories emerged. In Tokyo, a young woman who collected Pop Mart figures reported that her limited edition Labubu often appeared in different places around her room, even though she lived alone. She began filming herself to prove she wasn't losing her mind. In the grainy footage, her Labubu figure indeed seemed to shift subtly during the night. The recordings showed the toy slightly adjusting its head, its grin catching the faint glow of her desk lamp. She uploaded the clips online, only for them to be removed within days, flagged for disturbing content. The woman later vanished from online communities altogether. Friends say she sold her entire collection and moved away, never explaining why. Skeptics argue these are nothing but exaggerations born from obsessive collectors, their imaginations fueling paranoia. But the sheer consistency of the accounts is what makes Labubu's legend frightening. The doll is repeatedly associated with themes of being watched, of whispering in sleep, and of slowly eroding the sanity of its owner. Some even claim the toy is modeled not just from Ka-Sing Lung's imagination, but from older Chinese and European folklore about trickster spirits that inhabit objects. In Cantonese ghost stories, there are beings known as Guai Zai, mischievous, childlike demons who attach themselves to household belongings, often starting harmlessly, but escalating to sinister behavior. In certain rural tales from Germany, there are rabbit-headed forest demons said to lure children by appearing as toys. Labubu's design, with its oversized grin and monstrous yet childish demeanor, eerily echoes both traditions. But perhaps the most chilling story tied to Labubu surfaced in 2018. A wealthy collector in Shanghai managed to acquire a one-of-a-kind prototype Labubu painted in deep crimson tones, a design that was never mass-produced. According to his wife, the doll was kept locked in a glass case in his study. Soon after bringing it home, the family began hearing knocks on the walls late at night. Their dog, usually calm, would bark frantically at the study door and refuse to go inside. The collector himself became withdrawn, obsessively polishing the glass case, muttering that it fogs up because it's breathing. One night his wife claimed she awoke to find him standing in the darkened hallway, holding the doll, speaking softly to it as though it were alive. When she confronted him, he insisted the toy had asked him to take it outside. Weeks later, he was hospitalized after what doctors called a psychotic break. His family got rid of the doll, but no one knows where it ended up. Among collectors, the Crimson Labubu is whispered about like an artifact of dread, a cursed object that should never have been created. Even in the West, Far from Asia, where Labubu originated, the doll has acquired a reputation. In 2021, a collector in France posted on Reddit about his Labubu figure that seemed to grow teeth. He uploaded a photo comparing it to when he first bought it, and while many dismissed it as lighting or a prank, the image circulated widely. The teeth did appear sharper, the grin more menacing. He deleted his account shortly after, and no one has been able to verify his identity since. Others, emboldened by the story, began posting their own Labubu sightings, figures caught on security cameras shifting their positions, dolls with eyes that reflected light like an animal's, or eerie scratches found on shelves where the toys had been placed. What makes Labubu uniquely terrifying is that it blends seamlessly into the modern world. Unlike cursed dolls of the past, Annabelle, Robert the Doll, or Okiku, Labubu isn't a relic hidden in a museum or shrine. It's sold openly, mass-produced, displayed in malls, and given as gifts. There may be thousands of them scattered across homes worldwide, any one of which could harbor the same malignant energy spoken about in these stories. And because of its playful design, children often beg their parents for one, unknowingly inviting the same sinister grin into their bedrooms. This accessibility turns Labubu from a rare haunted artifact into a potential global curse hiding in plain sight. Collectors often speak of a phenomenon they call the grin effect. The longer you own a Labubu, the harder it is to shake the feeling that its grin changes depending on your mood. When you're sad, it looks mocking. When you're angry, it looks hungry. And when you're scared, it looks alive. Psychologists might explain this away as projection, but those who have lived with the toy insist it's something more. Some even claim that throwing away or selling the doll doesn't work. It finds its way back, or another Labubu inexplicably replaces it, arriving by mail or appearing on a shelf. In online forums, stories persist of people hearing children's laughter in empty rooms after purchasing a Labubu. Others describe vivid dreams of the toy crawling into their beds, resting on their chest, its grin impossibly wide as it whispers in guttural tones. A particularly disturbing account from Malaysia details a teenager who swore his Labubu figure whispered his name one night. He was found days later in his room, wide-eyed and unable to speak, pointing only at the doll when asked what happened. His parents destroyed it, but the boy never fully recovered. To this day, no one can say whether Labubu's sinister reputation is simply the result of mass hysteria or whether its design truly tapped into an archetype of terror buried deep in human psychology. What is undeniable, however, is the pattern of fear and paranoia that follows its owners. A doll meant to be collected, displayed, and admired instead becomes an object of dread, its grin haunting in ways that linger long after it's out of sight. And so, the story of Labubu continues to spread, growing darker with each retelling. In a world where horror often feels confined to old legends and forgotten relics, Labubu reminds us that sometimes the most terrifying things are not locked away in dusty attics or hidden in ancient ruins. Sometimes they are sitting right in front of us, in bright packaging, waiting to be bought, waiting to be unboxed, waiting to grin at us from across the room. And if the stories are true, once Labubu is in your house, it never really leaves. Story 2. Okiku Doll, Japan's haunted child spirit that still grows hair. In the dim, flickering light of a shrine in Hokkaido, Japan, a doll rests inside a wooden display case. To any unsuspecting visitor, it looks like a traditional Ichimatsu doll, smooth porcelain skin, a delicate kimono, black hair styled neatly down her shoulders. Yet those who step closer often recoil, for something about this doll feels different, alive almost. Her dark, glassy eyes seem to follow you, her mouth slightly parted as if she wants to speak, and most disturbingly, her hair, once cropped short, has continued to grow longer with each passing year. This is Okiku, the haunted doll of Japan, whose story has unsettled generations and continues to inspire dread even today. The origins of the Okiku doll reach back to 1918, when a young boy named Eikichi Suzuki purchased the doll for his little sister, Okiku, from a bustling street market in Sapporo. At the time, dolls were cherished gifts, believed to carry good fortune and companionship. Okiku adored the doll instantly. She took it everywhere, feeding it, dressing it, whispering secrets into its ear, treating it as though it were her twin. Family members would later recall how inseparable the child and doll became, as though their bond ran deeper than simple affection. But tragedy struck within the year. At the tender age of just 3 years old, little Okiku fell gravely ill with a sudden fever. Despite every effort to treat her, the child passed away, leaving her family in unimaginable grief. In their sorrow, they placed the beloved doll on the family altar, dressing it in Okiku's favorite kimono as a way to honor her memory. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, but soon the Suzukis began to notice something strange. The doll's jet-black hair, once trimmed neatly to her shoulders, had begun to grow past her chin. At first, they thought it was their imagination, but with every passing month, the hair lengthened further, taking on a life of its own. The family became convinced that their daughter's spirit had found a home within the doll. They reported hearing faint giggles at night, the rustle of fabric as though tiny footsteps padded across the floor, and sometimes even a soft, childlike whisper, echoing in the darkness. Out of respect and fear, they continued to care for the doll, trimming its hair occasionally when it grew too long. But no matter how much they cut, it always grew back. The doll was no longer a mere keepsake. It had become Okiku herself, returned from death to remain with them. Years later, when the family moved from Hokkaido, they entrusted the doll to the Maninji Temple in Iwamizawa, where it remains enshrined to this very day. Monks at the temple maintain that the hair continues to grow, and in some accounts, even the mouth of the doll has begun to open slightly, revealing what look eerily like human teeth. Visitors to the shrine have spoken of feeling an oppressive weight in the room, as though the doll's gaze were pressing into their very soul. Some leave quickly, unable to shake the sensation of being watched, while others claim to hear faint sobs or feel the gentle tug of unseen hands on their clothing as they approach the glass case. The question remains, did the grief of the Suzuki family tether the soul of their daughter to this doll, or was there something already within it, waiting for a vessel to inhabit? Skeptics dismiss the tale as folklore, claiming the hair simply grows due to humidity and natural processes. Yet scientists who studied samples of the doll's hair in the 1970s confirmed something chilling. The strands were undeniably human. Okiku's story stands as one of Japan's most famous haunted legends, a tale that blends tragedy with the supernatural in a way that feels all too real. The doll is not just an artifact. It is a reminder of the thin veil that separates the living from the dead, and how grief, love, and unfinished bonds can sometimes pierce through that barrier, leaving behind something that defies explanation. But this is only the beginning. For what Okiku represents is not an isolated tale, but part of a far darker tradition of haunted dolls and spirit-bound objects across cultures, a reminder that innocence itself can sometimes be the vessel for horror. The Okiku doll is not just an object, it is an experience, a presence that seems to breathe and live in ways no ordinary toy ever should. Inside the quiet halls of Maninji Temple in Iwamizawa, Japan, visitors come face to face with it. A traditional Ichimatsu doll clothed in a faded kimono, her face pale and expressionless, her lips frozen in a faint, almost human pout. From afar, she seems like any other antique doll preserved behind glass. Yet the longer one looks, the more unsettling the details become. Her eyes, glossy and deep, give the sense that something inside is watching back. Her hair, once cut neatly short, now flows down her shoulders, growing inch by inch as if nourished by some hidden force. What makes the Okiku doll so unnerving is not simply her appearance, but the story of how she became what she is. The tragic death of a child, the devotion of a grieving family, and the lingering suspicion that somewhere in that porcelain shell, the spirit of a little girl continues to linger, unwilling or unable to move on. The story begins in 1918, when a young boy named Eikichi Suzuki visited a bustling market in Sapporo. Among the trinkets, charms, and toys that lined the stalls, One particular doll caught his attention. It was a beautiful Ichimatsu doll, around 16 inches tall, dressed in an elegant kimono, with glossy black hair cut in the traditional style of the time. To Eikichi, it seemed like the perfect gift for his little sister, Okiku. He bought the doll with a few coins and carried it home, not realizing that this simple purchase would become one of Japan's most chilling legends. Okiku adored the doll instantly. She carried it everywhere, feeding it imaginary meals, tucking it into bed, whispering secrets into its ear. To her, the doll wasn't just a toy. It was a companion, a twin of sorts, someone who was always there in moments of joy and sorrow. Family members would later remark that the child seemed unusually attached to the doll, often talking to it as though it could answer back, often staring into its glassy eyes for long stretches, as though they were locked in silent conversation. But tragedy has a way of finding its way into even the happiest homes. Within the year, Okiku fell ill with a sudden, raging fever. The family tried everything: herbal remedies, prayers, doctors. But the illness claimed her quickly. She was just 3 years old. The Suzuki family was devastated. Their house, once filled with the sound of her laughter and footsteps, became unbearably quiet. In their grief, they placed the doll on the household altar, dressing it in Okiku's favorite kimono, as though the child's spirit could somehow linger there, watching over them. At first, it was simply a comfort. The doll reminded them of their lost daughter. But as the months passed, they noticed something strange. The doll's short, neatly trimmed hair had begun to grow longer. It was subtle at first, just a fraction of an inch, but soon the change was undeniable. The sleek bob of black hair extended past the chin, brushing the shoulders, growing further each year. The family cut the hair back out of practicality, but no matter how many times they trimmed it, the hair continued to grow again. By the time the doll had reached the temple years later, its hair hung thick and uneven, the strands clearly human when examined closely. The Suzukis became convinced that their daughter's soul had somehow taken refuge inside the doll, and the more they paid attention, the more they began to notice other unsettling signs. At night, faint giggles sometimes echoed from the room where the doll rested. Family members reported hearing soft footsteps, too small to belong to anyone living in the household. At times, the doll's position seemed slightly changed from where it had last been placed, as though it shifted when no one was watching. Once, a relative claimed to hear a child's voice whisper his name, only to find himself alone in the room with the doll's dark eyes fixed on him, fear mixed with reverence. The family continued to care for the doll, treating it with the same tenderness they once gave their daughter. When they finally moved away from Hokkaido years later, they felt it would be wrong to take the doll with them. Instead, they entrusted it to the monks of Manenji Temple in Iwamizawa, where it was enshrined in a wooden case. To this day, the temple tends to the doll, trimming its hair as it continues to grow. Monks have reported that the hair regenerates even after being cut. And in some accounts, the doll's lips have begun to part slightly over the years, as though forming words, or perhaps bearing small, human-like teeth. Visitors to the temple often describe an oppressive presence when standing before the doll. Some say her eyes seem to follow them, unblinking, as though tracking every movement. Others claim to feel sudden chills, goosebumps rising on their arms, even in the warmth of summer. A few leave quickly, unnerved by the sensation of being watched, while others swear they hear faint sobbing or the soft patter of footsteps behind them as they turn away. For many, the Okiku doll is not a relic of the past. It is alive, inhabited by something restless, something unwilling to be forgotten. Skeptics have tried to explain the phenomenon. Some argue that the hair's growth is simply due to humidity, or that the doll was originally crafted with human hair and appears to change over time due to natural shifts in texture. Yet in the 1970s, a scientific team reportedly analyzed strands of the doll's hair and confirmed it was indeed human. The results did not explain how a lifeless doll could continue producing new strands, nor did they calm the unease surrounding it. If anything, the confirmation only deepened the mystery. Legends have a way of spreading beyond borders, and Okiku's story has become one of Japan's most infamous haunted tales, passed down through books, television specials, and whispered warnings. For many, the doll embodies the Japanese belief in objects imbued with spirits, an idea rooted in folklore known as tsukumogami, where tools, toys, or possessions that are cherished or neglected long enough may awaken, developing a soul of their own. Was Okiku's doll animated by her love, by her grief, or by something darker waiting for a vessel? Over the years, countless visitors have traveled to the temple to see Okiku for themselves. Some come out of curiosity, others seeking proof of the supernatural. A few bring offerings, candies, toys, even small trinkets, leaving them at the doll's case as though appeasing a restless child. The monks tend to these offerings respectfully, but even they admit that something about the doll defies easy explanation. Stories circulate of tourists who mock the doll, only to experience sudden misfortunes shortly after leaving, accidents and illnesses they cannot explain. Others claim dreams of a small girl in a kimono follow them after their visit, her voice whispering in the dark, asking to come home with them. What makes the Okiku doll so terrifying is not just her physical reality, but the emotional core of the story. At its heart, this is the tale of a family who loved their daughter so deeply that even death could not separate them. The doll, whether haunted or not, became a vessel for their grief, a channel for their hope that part of their child might remain. Yet that hope twists into dread when the signs grow undeniable. The hair that should not grow, the whispers that should not be heard, the weight of eyes that should not be alive. The Okiku doll is both tragedy and horror entwined. The innocence of a child bound to the uncanny permanence of an object. To this day, the doll remains at Manenji Temple, encased yet never silenced. Each strand of hair that lengthens, each visitor who shudders under its gaze, each whisper of a child's laugh heard in an empty hall continues to blur the line between memory and haunting. Is Okiku still there, clinging to the world she left too soon? Or is something else wearing her face, using the doll as a vessel to draw the living closer? Perhaps the true horror of the Okiku doll lies not in what we can prove, but in what we cannot. It is the uncertainty, the refusal of the story to yield to explanation, that leaves the imagination grasping for answers in the silence of night. And in that silence, in the darkness of a shrine where a doll waits patiently behind glass, one truth lingers like a whisper. Sometimes love refuses to let go, and sometimes neither does death. Story 3. The Dybbuk box, the haunted wine cabinet that brings death and misery. There are objects that whisper of curses, objects that seem to carry the weight of suffering, but few have terrified modern audiences as much as the Dybbuk box, a simple wooden wine cabinet said to hold not just history, but a restless, vengeful spirit. To the untrained eye, it appears harmless, a medium-sized cabinet with faded carvings, its hinges stiff with age, its wood scratched and dull. Yet those who have come into possession of it speak of nightmares, illness, and an atmosphere of dread so heavy it clings to them even after they've tried to rid themselves of it. The Dybbuk box is not just a haunted object, it is a vessel of torment, a box that never seems to stop searching for its next victim. The story first surfaced in the year 2001, when a man named Kevin Mannis, a small business owner in Portland, Oregon, attended an estate sale. Among the items for auction was an old wine cabinet, modest and worn, but strangely captivating. Mannis bought it without hesitation, thinking it would make a unique addition to his furniture shop. Yet almost immediately, strange things began to happen. Employees reported overwhelming feelings of despair when near the cabinet. Lights flickered, shadows shifted unnaturally, and the smell of cat urine or jasmine flowers would suddenly fill the air with no explanation. Mannis himself began experiencing vivid nightmares, Dreams where an old hag with sunken eyes and a twisted face attacked him in the dark, her voice rasping as she pressed down on his chest. Others who came into contact with the box reported similar dreams, as though the same entity was visiting them all, night after night. Manis later revealed that the cabinet had belonged to a Polish Holocaust survivor, who warned him never to open it, claiming it contained a Dybbuk, a malicious spirit from Jewish folklore, the wandering soul of the dead, capable of attaching itself to the living in order to continue its existence. Ignoring the warnings, Manis opened the box and found strange items inside. 2 pennies from the 1920s, a small lock of hair tied with string, another lock of blonde hair, a wine goblet, a dried rosebud, and a candle holder. Each object seemed insignificant on its own, yet together they felt like fragments of some ritual, pieces of a story that wasn't meant to be uncovered. From that point onward, the activity only intensified. Electronics failed. Glass shattered on its own. Visitors became violently ill. Relationships broke apart under the stress of its presence. Terrified, Manis attempted to gift the cabinet to friends and family members, but each time, disaster followed. His mother, upon receiving the box, suffered a sudden stroke. Others developed chronic illnesses, hallucinations, and unrelenting anxiety. Eventually, Manis sold the box on eBay, passing its curse into the wider world. The listing itself became infamous, as the new owner, university student Iosif Nitsky, documented his own experiences: hair falling out in clumps, persistent illness, strange odors, and terrifying shadows that loomed in his apartment. By the time the Dybbuk box passed into the hands of Jason Haxton, director of the Museum of Osteopathic Medicine in Missouri, its reputation was undeniable. Haxton, though skeptical at first, soon experienced a barrage of misfortunes. He reported bleeding from his eyes, mysterious welts, and unexplainable health issues that plagued him until he placed the cabinet in a specially built containment box, claiming it helped neutralize the spirit within. The legend of the Dybbuk box exploded into pop culture when it inspired the 2012 horror film The Possession, cementing its reputation as the most haunted object in America. Even today, it rests in Zach Bagans' Haunted Museum in Las Vegas, sealed behind glass, where visitors report sudden nausea, fainting spells, and the overwhelming sense that something is watching them from the shadows. Skeptics argue the entire story is an elaborate hoax, pointing out inconsistencies in Manis's original account. But believers argue that the curse is too consistent, too widespread, and too destructive to be fabricated. After all, how do you explain the nightmares that so many different people reported? How do you explain the illnesses, the strokes, the patterns of misery that followed each new owner like a shadow they couldn't escape? In Jewish folklore, a Dybbuk is not just a ghost, it is a parasite. It clings to the living, feeding on their energy, their life force, their suffering. And if the Dybbuk box is truly a prison for such an entity, then perhaps every new owner is not simply a victim, but a host. Perhaps the spirit inside is not trapped at all, but waiting, watching, testing the limits of its wooden cage until someone foolish enough releases it fully into the world. The Dybbuk box is more than an artifact. It is a warning, a reminder that some objects should never be touched, never be opened, never be owned. For those who have tried, the consequences have always been the same: sleepless nights, unraveling health, shattered lives, and the sense that no matter how far they run, the curse inside that cabinet follows. So it sits now, contained but never silenced, a simple wooden box that hums with dread. Visitors stare at it through glass, some daring to take photos, others rushing past to escape the heavy air that seems to seep from its surface. And yet, in its silence, the Dybbuk box waits, patient as death itself, for the next hand brave or foolish enough to reach for it.